Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. Boy, we've got a star-studded cast with us today for this next topic. We're going to be talking all things kind of dairy economy. Our first guest is Gregg Doud. He's the CEO of the National Milk Producers Federation. Welcome. Appreciate having you here. Next, let's see, here to my right, I've got Dan Siemers. He's the president, CEO, and owner of Siemers Holsteins. Welcome. And this
Thanks,
is not
Scott.
the first time that we've met, but so I've spent some time with you. I believe it was in Vegas. You don't remember, I do, but I enjoyed the time.
You know what they say about Vegas, Scott.
I know, everything stays in Vegas.
That's right.
And we got Geiger over here, and he's the lead dairy economist with CoBank. And so, Corey, welcome. I appreciate you joining us today.
Pleasure to be here, and Dan and I actually have another connection. We both grew up in the same county, and that is where Dan's dairy farm is based out of.
It's true, for sure.
Is that right? And what county is this?
Manitowoc County, eastern Wisconsin.
Eastern Wisconsin. Awesome. Yeah, I love Wisconsin. Gregg, why don't we start with you? You gave a presentation, I believe it was today, here at the Western Dairy Management Conference in Reno.
Yes, sir.
Give us kind of an overview of some of the things you shared with the audience.
Well, I tried to do my best to stay with Corey here in his presentation that he gave yesterday, talking about the somewhere between 8.5 and 9 billion in dairy processing and how to look at this industry going forward. The basic premise being not a dairy expert, but an agricultural expert and the chief ag trade negotiator in the Trump administration that has looked at a lot of different sectors in agriculture for a long time is I hope dairy farmers appreciate this investment in them that is being made by co-ops, by proprietary companies in the U.S., by big farmers that aren't in co-ops, and a little bit from outside of the industry and outside the country today. I don't know of another industry, I don't know another sector of the ag economy anywhere in the world that has this kind of investment going on. And it just really shows that when you look at protein, beef, pork, poultry, dairy in the world over the next 10 years, who can expand and grow, it's pretty clear. The expansion is going to come here in the U.S. It can't, they're shrinking in Europe, they're maxed out in New Zealand, the other places you go in the world, climate-wise, et cetera, you can't really do it. And everybody knows it. And it's not anything really new other than now we're seeing these investments come online. The new Hillmar plant in Dodge City now is up and running 40%. So what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of what are we going to do with this stuff? And from my perspective, I'm not an expert in the domestic industry, but I do understand the trade component to this and what I see coming on the trade side and helping people understand that whether it's digesters or beef on dairy or cheese exports or whatever it is, it's going to be good.
Yeah.
This industry is going to be good.
Yeah.
You're in really good shape here. Let's go.
Yeah.
Well, and obviously that investment does so much for so many of us. As a dairy producer, we were able to build a new dairy and find a new milk market because, Agropur built a new plant in our area. And that feeds all those jobs, does so much for our business. So, and the banking community, everybody that's involved in everything that we do. So when that investment happens, it just floods the economy with all good things. So it's tremendous what's going on, and it's going to keep our dairy economy vibrant for many years.
Yeah, can you guys talk a little bit more, some of the specifics about what are some of those investments? You mentioned one, what others are taking place? The economics of feeding Reassure precision release choline. Reassure is fed during the transition period, and because it's fed for such a short period of time, it costs just $15 per cow. And yet the benefits will continue to generate income throughout the year. Cows fed Reassure produce 5 pounds more colostrum, which pays for your Reassure investment on the very first day of lactation. Cows fed Reassure also produce 5 pounds more milk per day, every day. That means after the first day, every day is payday. Invest in Reassure during the transition period and recoup your investment on the very first day of lactation. After that, you got it. Payday.
Well, I think Corey's he's the banker sitting over here. He knows the answer to this.
You know, we're approaching $9 billion of new investment in dairy plants, and that's coming online through 2027. Over half of that's in cheese, and if you know the nursery rhyme, Little Miss Tuffet sat on her muffet eating her curds and whey. When you make cheese, you get whey. And with the weight loss drugs that are GLP-1s and that, whey protein isolates, high quality whey protein concentrates are in equal demand as cheese. So that's two of the big drivers of this. And so that's been a big part of the plant investment. There's actually, fluid milk is stabilized here in the 2024 data, and there's investment in that category. And when you see investment in Class 1 beverage milk, a lot of that's going to also involve membrane technology. So you're going to see a lot more lactose-free varieties. You're going to see more of the Fairlife products that are boosted with protein. And, we have a part of our country here. Dairy cows are throughout in every state of the United States, but the Southeast market is really milk deficit. And a lot of those plants, I say, are in a crescent shape. If you go from Texas to Missouri, up to Ohio, New York, and New Jersey area, and there's two in the heart of that, Georgia and Florida. But we're going to be looking to set plants up as an industry on that rim and move milk into that area, and also use technology extended shelf life. You'll hear the acronym ESL quite a bit. And so a lot of different dynamic innovation taking place in dairy, and certainly we're going to see yogurt as a big growth category. Gregg talked about that in his presentation this morning as well. And the Greek yogurt category, very high protein. Americans eat about half as much as the Europeans do. So we're going to see growth in that area as well.
So how much of this investment of these new plants is that targeted to export? Much of it? Or are we still looking for a lot of that to be consumed here?
Well, certainly in the Class 1 beverage market, almost all that's
That'll
domestic, although there's some of that would be exported potentially out of Florida to the Central American countries. When it comes to cheese and whey protein, I would say over half of that's being developed to service the export market. Think of it as the more nutrient dense the product, the more opportunity is to export it.
Yeah, we had a podcast earlier today with Dr. Torsten Hemme. He said there's by 2050 there's going to be a requirement for 450 million tons more milk. And his proposition was, so where's that going to come from? And certainly United States is positioning itself well, as you kind of mentioned before. So I'm just kind of curious if you guys share that kind of thinking and that kind of forecasting.
Yes, and one thing I would add to your comment about ESL, the ultra-processed or ultra-pasteurized products, that investment is in that crescent that you're discussing. There's a couple other things you can talk about here, is schools. So one of the big issues that we're trying to fix in Washington right now is getting whole milk back in school. I had a Senate Ag Committee hearing just yesterday about this. We know that we had a big positive vote on this in the House last year. We know we're going to get that again. We think that if we can make this change to get whole milk, 2% milk back in schools, this really opens up an opportunity to have an industry where we have the potential to sell ESL milk in schools for really the first time. And that creates for the Miami, the Chicagos, the Atlantas, these bigger, Cincinnati has been Ohio has been a big proponent of this. Okay, does that satisfy the demand? Well, what if we can match that with selling that in the Caribbean or Central American countries as well? That really makes the whole business model hum in terms of a major investment and that kind of strategy in this industry.
In the legislation that Gregg's talking about, why it's so important, the growth category in fluid milk in the most recent years has been all around whole milk. It's not been the other categories. So flavors and the fat, let's get it to consumers' hands and school children.
Yeah.
And with the Make America Healthy Again deal, there's no question that that's
going to be part of it.
The science is very clear in this, is that fat in milk is not the same thing as fat in potato chips.
Yeah.
Great points.
And people understand this. The scientists understand this. The dietary guidelines need to be changed to reflect this. And so we've got a lot of momentum here. That momentum, then that's what we're looking at. Well, how does that translate into business models?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Milk's healthy again.
Yes.
It always has
It
been.
always kind of has been.
Yeah, imagine that, yeah.
It's kind of been a struggle though on the whole food pyramid to get that stuff all done the way that we've wanted it to from on the dairy side. So that'll be the next opportunity for us to see if we can't get some of these recommendations done.
Oh, there's been so much work on and so much investment on these alts, the alternatives. And you see how that has turned out is that consumers just don't go for it. It doesn't taste well. They don't like it. Yeah, they drink some of that stuff some of the time. We've got the better product. We know we've got the better product. Now and that's the point of the dairy industry is I'm just trying to emphasize now is our time. We have got this thing swung in our direction here for the first time in decades. Let's go.
People like real. Real is real and fake is fake.
When we talk about the plant investment, and earlier this week, the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding had a meeting here, and Dan was on that panel. We're talking about plant investment, full-fat, nutrient-dense dairy products, and the revolution, the generational change that's been happening on dairy farms has been components. And Dan's lived that. When I think of dairy producers across the United States on genomics and genetics, Dan is certainly in the top cream of the crop there, and I think he has a lot of insight on what's changed on his farm and what he's shipping to his processing plants.
Well, it's crazy, and that's the entire country as far as especially fat. Protein is gaining momentum as well, but especially fat. We use bulls now that in one generation you can increase fat percentage by 0.4, almost 0.5% of fat in one generation. It's been something like, and we have our genetics business and the formulas really to say thank you for that, because we focus more on pounds of fat and pounds of protein now, and to get health traits and have that, it's meant somewhat less pounds of milk to get everything else together. Now, of course, I think if we're going to try and get protein back in our business, we're going to need more milk as a carrier, and to focus on that again, because I don't know, I from what I've seen, we might be getting to the point with some of these plants that there's almost too much fat right now. We're going to have to think about that and balance it again. Fat's been a great story in dairy, but right now the cheese plants, it's hard for them to get all the money out of the marketplace trying to move that fat. So it might be a game of catch up that they need to figure out where it has to go, and maybe it's logistics. But I also think that we're, as the dairy community, is going to have to focus a little bit harder here for a while on protein pounds.
Yep. Protein is certainly going to be a driver. As this industry evolves and changes, there's a lot of opportunity here. I think that's a central theme that we're talking about. So dairy farmers are responding. 90% of the milk check comes from 92% of dairy farmers get paid on multiple component pricing. 90% of that milk check and multiple component pricing is butter, fat, and protein. So while some of our cheese plants they don't quite need all the butter fat that's coming from the dairy farms, but there's a big BUT I'm going to put in there. But in 2010, the United States imported 10 million pounds of butter. Not a whole lot. By 2020, we imported 100 million pounds of butter and anhydrous milk fat, which you'd use to make ice cream and butter and sour cream. And last year it was 172 million pounds. So there's opportunity. While we're making record amounts of butter fat in this country, we are still not filling our needs domestically on butter fat. On the flip side, when you look at our exports, we're basically keeping our butter fat in this country and exporting skim milk solids, which is protein. So we have I don't want to call it retooling, but we need to find especially opportunities in butter.
So I would make 2 points with that. And I'm glad you brought up the butter thing, because this is something that is really how fast this has changed in butter.
Big time.
Just in a couple years is really, it's a market signal that is not something we're used to seeing. What I'm really excited about, and it's very fortuitous, Corey, is that we've got the changes in the federal milk marketing order coming in terms of components and all of this. Couldn't finally, after 25 years of this, couldn't happen at a better time, because that too will allow the market to send the signal back to dairy farmers as this is what the market is demanding, this is what we need to do more of.
And I want to come back to what Dan said and turn it back to him. So the story on butterfat, there's a lot of different puzzle pieces on the table of the United States that we got to shift around to get this to go. Because you can't ship sweet cream, which is really the excess butterfat, from a plant long distances because fat globules are a little sensitive. So we can change butterfat quickly, not only through genetics but feeding. When it comes to protein in dairy, it's a lot more genetics. And so you have maybe a few less tools in the toolbox. And I think that's where I come back to Dan, what he was discussing, where we probably do need to double down on protein given the market trends on consumers.
Yes, I totally agree. And it's a situation in the genetics world where you want to skate to where the puck's going and not where it's been, and look out the windshield and not the rear view. And for those of us that are in that business, it's all about protein, and that's for various reasons. It's not like fat isn't important, because we're going to retool and make some investments and figure out where to go with that fat and make sense of all this. But in the cheese world, which upper Midwest, we just have to maybe find another grassland, another butter manufacturing plant to be able to use all that sweet cream.
And overall, globally, when you look at the marketplace, the domestic demand for butter is going to be unbelievably strong. You've talked about the imports. On the protein side, though, we've got all kinds of opportunity in the international marketplace. We've barely scratched the surface. And so, to your point, Corey, we've got to figure out how to shuffle things around from a domestic processing standpoint. We've got a lot of money coming in doing this right now. There'll still be pockets and places around the country where we'll have to, change some processing around to balance that. We don't know what that'll look like next. And I, in the conversations we've had here, and I've had just in the last year I've been in this job, I'm from north central Kansas. I grew up 15 miles from the Nebraska border. You look at the milk we're making in the Texas Panhandle, southwest Kansas, South Dakota. There's a big gap there between western Kansas and eastern South Dakota that doesn't have a lot of milk production today in Nebraska. That is the next frontier, I would predict, coming from the old cattle guy here and knowing what they can do in terms of cattle feeding in that part of the world. That'll be the next frontier in terms of processing investment and dairy investment as well, as that whole right down the center of the country evolves.
I know exactly what you're saying. When we expanded, we bought a herd in that area, and I couldn't believe that huge open area that basically had no dairies. and what it took, the dairy there that we purchased, what it took them to ship their milk. They were paying dollars per hundredweight to move that milk, and I could certainly figure out why they wanted to move those cows.
Yeah. Plenty of water there?
Plenty of water there. Plenty of forage there.
Yeah,
for sure.
And so that's the challenge in Texas is the water situation. You get into southwest Kansas, they can grow the forage. They're going to need to import the corn. Yeah. When I say import, I mean from Nebraska or Iowa.
Right.
But as you go up into Nebraska, they can do all of it. And so it's just a function. What do they lack? They lack the processing.
Yeah. Interesting. So we had a discussion earlier today, going back to the protein conversation. These developing countries, if milk stays cheap enough and milk components stay cheap enough, that's where a lot of this growth is going to come from.
The U.S. Dairy Export Council is really doing a lot of work here. And the question is, we're watching China and saying, China's been a little disappointing. I think even the Chinese would tell you they've been disappointed in dairy consumption in China. But if you look at, we've looked at places like Central America where for the first time on January 1 of this year, we finally got to zero tariff after 15, 18 years of working it down incrementally. What's really interesting about that part of the world is so many of the dairy products have a lot of vegetable oil in them still. The cheese, the butters, etc. They're not all dairy. It's not a really good product. If we can really work with them at a price point to get real whole dairy products in there from a butter or cheese standpoint, I think the potential is enormous for us to expand.
And Greg, what Greg brings up, I think in America we don't appreciate that. For the most part, Americans are rather blessed with their incomes. I mean, we have things we talk about as a culture and a society, but in travels around the world, when you go to the MENA countries, Middle East, North Africa, or you go to Vietnam, which is another good customer of U.S., consumers, a woman that will work 2 weeks to buy a can of whey protein isolates, which is baby formula, because she wants better for her child than that generation had. So dairy's very valuable, but to make some of this economically available for adults, not necessarily infants and toddlers, they do mixtures. Some things will use palm oil, some will use other the vegetable oils, so you kind of got a hybrid. It's not necessarily a dairy product. And so that's the other opportunity. And U.S. Dairy Export Council, places like Leprino, Dairy Farmers America, and others have research centers over in Southeast Asia because we need to be there. We need to let them work with our dairy ingredients from the U.S. because what a pizza looks like in Japan is completely different here. I'm pretty sure Dan and I wouldn't sit down and have squid or octopus on our pizza, but in Japan that's go-to, and so we need to make those products the way they want them.
They probably even like anchovies.
Yes.
Well, they're having a lot of yogurts and those kinds of things, I believe, right? They're easy to store and package, yeah.
They are. Well, and refrigeration is issues at certain parts of the world yet. We take that for granted, so we do need to make shelf-stable products. I mean, why did Vina Milk in Vietnam put up the most modern fluid milk processing plant about 7 years ago and make ESL milk before we even really thought about it here? Because they want to move it across the country and not have to refrigerate it.
Another key point on that is in Latin America, enormous demand and huge growth in drinkable yogurts. And where that's interesting is that you have a decent domestic dairy industry, but they can import our solids, our protein, and really make something that consumers really like. And so the industries are, we can actually work together here to make the pie bigger, to grow both sides, that improves the dairy industry. There, they expand, adapt technology. We can bring in products from what we're doing. It all works together to help consumers.
So take our best international customer, Mexico. That country, in the last 25 years, has grown milk production each and every year. And this is a perfect example of a rising tide lifts all boats. So their domestic dairy farmers are growing their industry, but the demand for dairy is growing so much that the growth in exports from the United States to Mexico continues to grow, and now 85% of their imported products comes from our country because consumer demand is improving, because consumers have more money and they want better, higher protein diets. Gregg earlier today said, I'm going to paraphrase this wrong, so correct me, but I want to walk our grain off our farms on 4 legs.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other one I use in other audiences, though, is we have to remind people that I grew up on a hog farm, not a dairy farm in Kansas. Is pigs and chickens are not pigs and chickens. They're little walking piles of corn and soybean meal.
If we're talking about animal protein here, maybe we turn the conversation a little bit to certainly another generational change, beef on dairy. And I know Dan has a very high-end genetic herd that's top in the country, but talk about how you've seen that on your farm and from your eyeballs, this whole metamorphosis.
It's changed the industry. There's no doubt, because if you look at average profits on herds, right, and there's a lot of dairies. If Corey, you're a banker, you know that the average dairy pretty much is $800 a cow of net per year, right? So now let's talk about $900 or $1,000 calves. So the rest of the dairy can almost break even, and the profit's really coming from those baby calves. It's crazy to think about it that way, but that's almost what we've gotten into. And we've had several presentations here at the Large Herd Seminar talking about the correct formulas, or how that we should figure how many calves that we need for replacement values. That was a big topic here this week, because probably a lot of dairies aren't making enough heifer calves. But this beef business and the length of time it's going to take to catch our beef up to the demand for beef is just unbelievable. And how that we get that caught up and how long it's going to take, it's really something. It's quite a story.
So as the former chief economist for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, a partner in a cow cave, I'm the beef guy, have been for a long, long time. Here's the point I want to make on this. This is going to be good for quite some time to come. I get this question a lot as well. You know, we've had a lot of beef guys get out of the business. They've seen it spike. They want to get out while the goodness good. We've got at least 3, 4, 5, 6 more years of this ahead of us. And that is just because of the weather situation, everything we have going on beef. We'd love to expand our cow herd in Kansas. We can't because of dry weather, et cetera.
So how do the processors end up being able to handle this many years of boom times, though? Because there's a lot of times that those guys are in the red on the box beef, and I don't know what it takes to fix that. Maybe that's not for today, but it's certainly an issue when you talk to the beef processors, how that, you know, where that cutouts versus box beef is.
Well, this is goes back to the first thing we talked about here today. Look at the investment in dairy and the new money in processing going in. You look on the meat side of the equation, beef, pork, poultry, they're just trying to stay alive. They're trying not to close. There's no money being spent in expansion like that anywhere on the meat side of the equation. And in fact, if we hadn't had beef on dairy, it would have already closed on the beef side.
And on the dairy farm, if you look at the numbers from the National Association of Animal Breeders, so if you go back to 2017, 2013 is kind of when this movement started. And in 2023, U.S. dairy farmers bought 7.9 million units of beef semen, record high. In 2024, that number flatlined for a very good reason, because 2 years ago you could have had your choice and privilege of that replacement at $1,600, and now you can hardly sniff them for double that money. So what happened last year in the data, U.S. dairy farmers moved from 8.4 to 9.9 million units of gender-sorted semen, because people like Dan are realizing, especially if you're growing, I got to make my own replacements because I'm not going to find them in the countryside. So we got two products, sex-sorted dairy and beef semen, which will probably become male-sorted beef. But
probably
go ahead,
will.
Dan.
But that is the story in the countryside. So the bigger dairies that are internally sourcing, they're looking at their numbers all the time, and that's the speed at which they grow, because it's just too hard to go out in the countryside and get these bought. And that's kind of been the story for expanding dairies is, what do your heifer pens look like? What can your heifer pens tolerate for milking strings? And it's different than what there's been. Greg, you just said the changes in the last 2 years. The changes in the last 2 years are just mind-boggling on almost all assets of all things animal agriculture. It's been phenomenal.
Yeah. You used to have too many heifers not too long ago.
Well, exactly, and now with the beef thing, I don't know when that this changes. I think we're in a long-term trend, and of course, you know, as soon as everyone starts thinking you're in a long-term trend, you're not in it anymore. That's kind of how it works.
Well, and where this trend to me is the most remarkable on the beef side is and I've said this many, many times in many crowds, if you would have told me 5 years ago that we could have taken that steak in that restaurant from $30 to $40 to $50 and not whacked demand hard, I would have told you you're crazy. Look at the demand side of the equation. We're at a $50 steak, and we're just still pumping them out. It is, and that's where that money's coming from to drive all of this that we're talking about. It's the consumer.
And the great part of that story is quality has come a long ways too.
Oh my goodness!
You know, when's the last time? I can't remember the last time I had a bad steak experience. And when we were kids, we used to have those all the time. It's changed.
That black calf coming off of that dairy is certified Angus beef, for goodness sakes. Remarkable change in the industry in a very short period of time.
You know, sometimes, certainly a podcast like this, you want to kind of look over the horizon. A couple times in my days at Hordes Dairyman and now at CoBank, I've been invited to speak to beef nutrition companies and that. And one of the things we talked about Angus certified beef, I think there's an opportunity for dairy long term. I certainly believe, and the data's out there, that the dairy cow is the most studied animal on planet Earth. We have more genetic information. We have more phenotypic information. Now we're making a pretty homogeneous product that gives the consumer a very repeatable, good experience. And we have more tracking of the dairy animals than we do in other livestock sectors. Well, beef. I won't go into hogs. So there may come a time that dairy could have its own certified fill-in-the-blank product here too, because there's just a lot of opportunity. When you go to Japan, you scan a QR code, and I know right where that steer came from, and it could even have been America. And so there's so much more possibility yet.
Well, so I'm going to combine three things here that we've talked about today. First is the nutrition side of the equation and what we're doing there. You have a PhD ruminant nutritionist as a consultant, I'm guessing.
Absolutely.
Of course. Then on the veterinary side of the equation, and what is amazing to me is you go into these big rotary dairies and the cow walks off after all her data has been downloaded, and if she has so much as a sniffle, one door closes, one door opens, and the vet's standing there with a book saying, okay, I got exactly what's going on
That's exactly how it works. That's exactly how it works.
That's, again, is a big change. So you combine the nutrition with the vet side of this, and then the final piece of this that I see coming that's going to come in with this is the data analytics piece. The data that we have, now let's figure out, you combine this with the genetic side of it, let's figure out what we're doing. So I'm going to give you a little tip here. What's interesting, a company that I'm watching, I was actually part of a Shark Tank.
Is that right?
Of a venture capitalist that invested in a company called Meta.ai. Have you heard of this company?
I have not.
It's an young Israeli guy that went to MIT. He takes the genetics of the cow, and then he takes the feed that they're using, and he's built an artificial intelligence algorithm that says, okay, now I can look at Bovaer or Rumensin or whatever seaweed it is, and I can decrease my methane by 20%. This is what he's told me, and he's working with Hillmar and other folks now. Everybody needs to know about this guy. Yaniv is his name. He is really smart. He's like 30-some years old. I can decrease methane 20%. I can increase productivity 7%. Based upon what he's done so far and all this. What he's told me too is he said, and if you don't get these ingredients, so he's combining ingredients. It's like a linear program kind of thing that he's doing.
It's a predictive model. Predictive model.
And he said, and if you're not doing it right, he said, I can really whack my productivity with increased methane as well.
Yeah, of course.
And so that's what the final piece of this is the data. And being able to figure, these people that come in and say, well, I can help you. This is exactly what Doge is doing, Elon Musk is doing in the federal government right now, is I can analyze the data and figure out what we're doing wrong really quickly. We're going to do this in the dairy industry.
Well, then, as we kind of close out, what I'd like to ask each of you guys to do is just kind of share some final summary thoughts with the audience, some key takeaways that you think they ought to take from the conversation today. Corey, would you mind starting us off?
Tonight's last call question is brought to you by Niasure Precision Release Niacin. Niacin is a proven vasodilator for heat stress reduction and a powerful antilipolytic agent for lowering high blood NEFA in transition cows. Protected with Balchem's proprietary encapsulation technology, you can be sure it is being delivered where and when your cows need it. Learn more at balchem.com/Niasure.
I would. We have some great opportunities in the export market, and we've really talked about those on the podcast, but we cannot overlook the domestic dairy market. I mean, it's our bread and butter, pun intended. A year ago, we sold, if you look at Circana data, $76 billion of dairy products. Dairy is the largest space in the grocery aisle. And it's the reason it's in the back of the store because grocers want to pull consumers through and get them the dairy case. In the past year, in 2024, that number has gone to $78 billion. So there's a lot of the U.S. dairy market is growing too. But the world is turning to us. That investment, that $9 billion plant investment, is happening here because other processors, domestic and international, believe that the U.S. dairy farmer will respond and deliver more components. And components have been up 27% since 2010, and fluid milks has been up 15%. So these market dynamics are taking place, and dairy is dynamic and growing. Just to put that $78 billion perspective, if you put all the beer and the liquor and the wine combined, they don't even match dairy. And that's phenomenal data and perspective on our industry.
Yeah, interesting. Dan, you got a few comments for us?
Well, one thing we didn't get to talk about much is the sustainability story around animal agriculture. And one of those things is certainly the capture and harvesting of the methane. And I think the digester industry, that whole part of it, 45V, everything that we're trying to get accomplished on that side, it's a really good story to tell in the dairy industry. And I think that that's probably something that is going to need to be brought forward as there's more and more climate conscious people, and we talk about what that that technology can do for our planet. I think that that's something that we can be all excited about where everything else is going, but there's a lot of people that view animal agriculture through the lens of, well, it's great, but how's it affecting our planet? So I think we're going to have to do, we have a digester that we just got into that I spent a lot of time working on that, for anybody listening that wants to learn more about that or the different ways that you can make that work, I'd be happy to talk with them, because I think it's a great story that we're going to need to keep telling.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, perhaps we can do a separate podcast on just that topic sometime here in the not too distant future. So let's stay in touch and work on that.
Sure. Thank you.
Perfect. Greg, final comments?
Final comment is I need your help in Washington. The challenge that I see in Washington is we have all this money that is spent on our advantage in U.S. agriculture is technology. This is our thing. And where I ended my speech here is a point I've made when I was in the private sector working with all these startup companies in agriculture and this new technology, digesters, 45V, tax credit side of the equation. But my big what I see that we need help on is companies are investing in us, but if the U.S. government and our regulators, the Food and Drug Administration, et cetera, doesn't approve this technology so we can commercialize it, so the people that made an investment can get a return on investment, what's going to happen? They're going to go somewhere else. They're going to go to a different country, different industry to get that return with the technology that they have, and we're going to be sunk. We have got to help our government understand that you have got to approve this technology for us at the speed of commerce. They're falling down. They've got to pick up their game. We have all got to be chirping at the administration and at our members of Congress about this fact that this is our opportunity, this is our time, but this is the impediment. This is where we get the pinch point here is getting this approved by our government.
Yeah. One topic we failed to touch on real quick here, and we can kind of bring this back into the conversation, but is tariffs. And what impact do we think that they're going to have on our business near and maybe longer term?
So we saw what happened today in the announcement, and I know there's been a lot of fussing with Canada, and really, in my opinion, being very heavily involved in this a few years ago, but not being involved now, is I just don't think there was a very good relationship there between Trudeau and Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there really wasn't all that much of an argument for us to go after them as hard as we did. It just seemed like we were, yes, exactly.
I think that's what that was, and so he was trying to make a change there, and yeah, he got that change done all right, but there's a lot of other stuff there. Well, the announcement that was made today is that Canada and Mexico are exempted from the 10% tariff, et cetera. So I think there's an acknowledgement now that, okay, we've had a frank conversation with our closest allies and trading partners here. This is going to get interesting now with the 10% tariff, the 25% tariff on autos, and, especially with the Chinese. I think there's a lot of frustration and working with China. I know there's has to be more conversations coming with the European Union on all this. The key point I would make on all of this is not, we typically think of government as making a static decision and then don't change. President Trump is a businessman. He's not a politician. I can guarantee you one thing. 24 hours from now, this will be different. There will be changes. Another 24 hours, there will be changes.
We almost need a date stamp this
exactly
on April 2nd here.
This will be a constant evolution. And so what you can do, though, is on this issue, on the immigration issues, on all of the tax issues, is you've got every dairy farmer in America has to have that relationship with their member of Congress, their senator, and help them understand in real time. You see that decision that was made in Washington yesterday? This is how it's affecting me on that farm. Have that conversation with your member of Congress to help them be able to adjust and help our government move in real time as well. That's the best advice I can give anybody.
Gone are the days when a farmer could just be a farmer. Nowadays, you have to be thinking about all those things, and you have to be able to be politically active.
And don't assume that you have a farm kid as the ag staffer for that member of Congress that understands what you're going through.
Exactly. Greg, you said something interesting today in your presentation. You talked about, Europe standing in the agricultural world, and how that we're going to be eroding into that, and that could be the next big area of opportunity for us.
Well, okay, so I had an opportunity last minute to come in and give a key address at the USDA Outlook Conference, and the thing that I said about Europe that, I refer to the farm to fork initiative as the farm to empty fork initiative, and the farmers over there aren't very happy either, but I'll just say this is, if I say anything nice about the European Union and the folks in Brussels, I will have misspoken. How's that?
Funny. That's funny. Well, if you look at the world order and where world prices are, and who does the exporting, and where the technology is, and who has the advantage, I would be scared in my boots right now if I was a European farmer. I just don't know how that ends up working. But I guess everything plays out in time.
Absolutely. With that, gentlemen, that's a great stopping point. I want to thank you guys for joining us today. This has been an awesome discussion. I could hardly keep up. I'm going to have to go back and listen to this at least twice. All right. So, again, thank you guys. Also, to our loyal listeners, thank you for joining us once again. Hope you learned something. Hope you had some fun. And we hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests. So please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.